For the past 3 weeks, we've been having kind of an introduction to the Beatitudes. And the first week, we talked about the difference between Eastern and Western thinking. Jesus lived in an Eastern country, taught people who were of an Eastern culture. And one of the things about Eastern culture is they communicate using pictures with stories, things that can be visualized. They look at the whole of a thing. Whereas Western is much more likely to look at the details of something, to kind of take it apart, to communicate with words, with ideas, abstractions. Eastern thinking is they want to know God, whereas Western is more likely to want to know about God, know the facts, know how to define Him. And Western thinking wants to know information from the teacher that they admire. There's teachers that I would love to sit in the class of so I could learn things that they know. I don't necessarily want to be like them. But Eastern thinkers want to be like their teacher. A good teacher is one that lives a certain example, and they want to live that way. The disciples who came to Jesus were seeking to become like Him. And that's an important part, because being a disciple means to be like Christ. And they were expecting teachings that could help them visualize what that was going to be like. And Jesus did just that. If you close your eyes for a minute, I'd like for you to picture some of the elements of the Beatitudes. You can picture every single one of them to one extent or another, even though he's talking about spiritual things. Poor in spirit. Now, you may not be able to picture someone who is poor of spirit, but you can at least picture someone who's poor and apply that to the spiritual. You can picture someone who receives a kingdom. You can picture someone who is mourning, grieving, wailing, and you can picture someone being comforted. You can picture someone who is meek, gentle, willing, submissive, and you can picture someone who inherits land. You can picture a hungry and thirsty person, and you apply that to righteousness. And you can picture someone being abundantly supplied, someone being satisfied. You can picture a merciful and compassionate person, and you can picture someone receiving mercy and compassion. There's all these things that you can picture, pure and clean of heart, and someone who can see God clearly. I can see more clearly with my glasses. Blessed are the peaceable. We can picture the peaceable person, a peacemaker. And we can picture someone who is a child of a good person. They will be called children of God. We can picture someone being mistreated and persecuted and pursued. And again, we can picture the kingdom, a person receiving a kingdom or being a part of a kingdom, an active part of the kingdom. So all of these things were, our Eastern thinking. And then we looked at disciplines, spiritual disciplines, things that help us to detach from the world and attach to God. Things like, when it comes to detaching from this world, fasting, solitude, silence, getting away from those things, fasting from our electronic devices. And then things that help us to attach to God, things like being, studying and praying and meditating, memorizing. Those are things that they don't make us godly people, but they put us in a position where God can make us into godly people. And then last week we talked about the context of the Beatitudes and how the Beatitudes were directed at Jesus' disciples, not at the crowd. The rest of the sermon may have been directed at the crowd, or they may have come up the mountain. But the first people to come, to leave the crowd, were His disciples. And it says, and he taught them, saying. So with that in mind, with us being disciples, us wanting to be like Christ, let's repeat the Beatitudes like as we did last week. And we're going to do this every week. And hopefully you can memorize these as we go, or at least have them better in your mind. So repeat after me. When Jesus saw the crowds, he went up on the mountain. And after he sat down, his disciples came to him. And opening his mouth, he taught them, saying, Blessed are the poor in spirit, for the kingdom of the heavens is theirs. Blessed are those who mourn, grieve, and wail, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, gentle, willing, and teachable, for they will inherit the land. Blessed are those hungering and thirsting for righteousness, for they will be abundantly supplied and satisfied. Blessed are the merciful and compassionate, for they will receive mercy and compassion. Blessed are the pure and clean of heart, for they will see God clearly. Blessed are the peaceable, for they will be called children of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted and pursued because of righteousness, for the kingdom of the heavens is theirs. Blessed are you when people insult you and persecute you and pursue you, falsely saying all kinds of evil things against you on account of me. Rejoice and be very glad, for your reward is great in the heavens. For in the same way they persecuted and pursued the prophets before you. Now you notice that blessed in the Greek makarios, to be fortunate, to be enviable, to be happy, to be in a good position, is the word that is used in the Greek. But Jesus probably wasn't using Greek. If he was speaking in Aramaic, he used the word tav, which is the word that is used in Genesis chapter 1, when God separated the light from the darkness. Making the light, he saw that it was good. It was pleasing to him. And so, pleasing or good would be the definition defined, as the Jews look at the first time that a scripture is used, or a word is used in the Bible. This would be God defining, having to do with his creation. And so here's the new creation. Now, if he used the Hebrew word, it was most likely Esher. And Esher is a word that is first used in Deuteronomy chapter 23. Just before Moses dies, his last words, in fact, this is the last line of what he says to Israel before we hear of him dying. Blessed are you, O Israel, who is like you, a people saved by the Lord, who is the shield of your help and the sword of your majesty. So your enemies will cringe before you, and you will tread upon their high places. The last words of Moses had to do with the first use of this word, Esher. And the first word of Jesus' Sermon on the Mount is the same Hebrew. Now, it's also used in the book of Job, but it's by one of Job's friends that uses the word blessed. The next time we see it being used, and this would have been because of their singing of the Psalms, this is the first word of the first Psalm. Psalm 1, verses 1-2. How blessed is the man who does not walk in the counsel of the wicked, nor stand in the path of sinners, nor sit in the seat of scoffers, but his delight is in the law of the Lord, and in his law he meditates day and night. So here we have this first psalm speaking of the righteous person. And then in the next psalm, the very next psalm, Psalm 2, in the very last line, prominent places in the first or last part, this one has to do with the Son, and it has to do with the coming kingdom. Do homage to the Son, that he not become angry, and you perish in the way. For his wrath may soon be kindled. How blessed are all who take refuge in him. Psalm 2, verse 12. So here we have this word blessed as used in the Bible, as defined by other Bible scriptures. And here we have people who are coming to the Son. A song that they had sung in synagogue and at the temple many, many times. That word, Esher. And so it had a significance to them. So what does it mean to be poor in spirit? It means to be impoverished, spiritually impoverished. And the truth is, we are all spiritually impoverished. Everyone is. But not everyone realizes it. So the one who is poor in spirit is a person who realizes or recognizes their spiritual poverty. We can picture a materially impoverished person, no security, dependent upon others for existence, a person who's sad and empty, always hungry, always needing. When Adam and Eve were on this earth at the very beginning, they were rich as it was possible to be. Every need that they had was supplied. All this before they sinned. They had the garden. They had God walking with them in the garden. They had every need supplied. They had each other. It was a peaceful place, a paradise. But they lost the garden. They lost the tree of life, which sustained their life. And all of it was because instead of learning from God, who would have taught them good and evil, as other humans came to this earth, other people would be tempted. God was going to teach them, I believe. And so, but they gave that all up because they wanted instantaneously. They wanted to bite into some fruit and suddenly know all there was to know, to be like God. And that was their downfall. Can you imagine a little infant suddenly having all knowledge of good and evil? You can't handle that. You can't digest it. And God knew that. So when it comes to the legacy that Adam and Eve left for us, it was the lack of God on this earth, the lack of God, because we were made to operate with God. And so all those years went by, and now Jesus is coming back. Now when you look at Ephesians chapter 2, verses 12 through 13, Paul speaking to the Christians at Ephesus, remember that you were at that time separate from Christ, excluded from the commonwealth of Israel, strangers to the covenant of promise, having no hope and without God in the world. But now, in Christ Jesus, you who formerly were far off have been brought near by the blood of Christ. Christ made it possible for us to be with God again. So that's what changed. It's changed when Christ came, the new Adam, the one who has restored that relationship with God. So the Beatitudes are Jesus' teaching as to what it's going to look like to be God's workmanship, to be with God in the world, created in Jesus Christ for good works. And what it will look like as we follow him as students, as apprentices, as people who want to be like him. The setting, Jesus sits down, as you just recited. The disciples see him. There's a big crowd. They separate themselves from the crowd. People who are wanting to be healed or watch the show as people are healed. They want to learn. They want to learn from Jesus, and they head up the mountainside. They are sitting down around him. The crowd is below. The sea, which they call Chinnereth, which means harp, because if you look at a map, you'll see that the Sea of Galilee is shaped kind of like a harp. And then there's that sea of people down there who are not yet disciples. And Jesus begins, he says to them, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for the kingdom of the heavens is theirs." He says it to them. They are poor in spirit. They realize that they don't know. They realize that there's a spiritual poverty in their life, and they want that taken care of. And so the promise is not that they're going to receive a few coins in order to get them through the day. The promise is that they will receive the kingdom of the heavens. So more than they could ever use. They are going to become co-heirs with Christ, they'll learn later. So the blessed are those who don't know and know that they don't know. Blessed are those who are small and realize that they're small. Blessed are the repentant, those who have turned from what does not work to learn what will work. And Jesus is the one who has the answer. Just like God had the answer for Adam and Eve in the garden. There are many ways in which people deal with physical poverty. They can work, they can steal, they can scam and con, they can beg and try to have people be sympathetic to them. But there's only one place to go. You can't steal or work yourself to heaven or any of those to deal with the spiritual poverty. People try, but it doesn't work. The only way to take care of the spiritual poverty is to come to Christ. The person who is poor in spirit realizes how important the spiritual world is. In 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verses 16 through 18, it says, "Therefore we do not lose heart, but though our outer man is decaying, yet our inner man is being renewed day by day. For momentary light afflictions is producing for us an eternal weight of glory far beyond comparison. While we look not at the things which are seen, but at the things which are not seen. For the things which are seen are temporal, but the things which are not seen are eternal." And so the person who seeks the spiritual realizes the value of those things. The spiritual is what's going to last. Over in Colossians chapter 3, verse 1, Paul says to the Colossians, "Therefore, if you have been raised up with Christ, keep seeking the things above, where Christ is seated at the right hand of God. Set your mind on things above, not on things on earth. For you have died, and your life is hidden with Christ in God. When Christ, who is your life, is revealed, then you will be revealed with him in glory. So we have these promises. We have this real life that we are to live. The poor in spirit person, disciple, may not know much, but they know the one who does know how to deal with their poverty, with their spiritual poverty. They know that this world is temporary, a life that will end, and then what? And they are living their lives for the then what. So all the world's values are temporary. All the things that people consider so important are things that they cannot take with them. It's really a lot like a Monopoly game when you think about things. People have their cash, in the Monopoly game. They may have all the best properties. They may even have the utilities, and they may have on top of everything, they may have the hotels on all the properties. They may have even the get out of jail free card. And I think a lot of times even people who are temporal think that that's all that it takes to have just to get out of jail free card that they get by going through some ritual or saying certain words, and now they're home free. But the Bible teaches that it's not a get out of jail free or fire insurance or anything like that. That life in Christ is a life. It is following him to where he lives. I saw a cartoon one time about a drunk coming before a judge. And he says, if it please the court, I have a get out of jail free card. Well, that didn't work in the court. And it's not going to work in the future court either. This game that we play does not translate into the real life. It's going to happen someday. The disciples realized their poverty. They realized their ignorance, their smallness. They realized where they could become richer and wiser and grow. Later in John 6, Jesus would teach them about the bread of life. And over the sermon, people kind of turned against him. They said that this is hard teaching. So he turned to his disciples. He said, "What about you?" And basically, Peter said, "Where else can we go? You're the one who has life eternal." Poorness of spirit has to do with humility. And attached to the bulletin is an attachment that has to do with humility. It'd be interesting for you to look that over and see what you think about that. Realize all the things. We can be proud about anything. We can think of ourselves as self-sufficient. But we have to realize that this is a short life, and that this life, though how we play it is important, it's just a game. It's not. Nothing is permanent in this life. There's going to come a time when all the properties and everything like that are put away, and all the money and all the things that work in Monopoly are going to have to be put away, and the board is going to be folded up, and we're going to have to put that away. And then what? And so Jesus says, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for the kingdom of the heavens is theirs." Hope this is helpful to you. Hope you have a good day.